Welcome to The Explainer. So, let's talk about a fascinating idea. What if the best way to come up with something new isn't just about thinking harder? What if it's about thinking with shapes? We're going to dive into this really powerful method for generating brand new insights. And you know what? It all starts with the actual space around your thoughts. Now, this isn't some story about a grand, perfectly planned theory. Not at all. It's much more organic. It's about a single moment of discovery, that aha moment, and then how that one pattern got repeated and the absolute cascade of ideas that just flowed from it. Okay, so let's set the scene. It all kicks off on a Saturday, back in February 2026. A researcher named Oliver Ding is just, hanging out at the library waiting for his kids, a scene that's probably super familiar to a lot of you, and boom, he has this sudden breakthrough. So he's mulling over this old framework he developed years back. It was called knowledge engagement. And then, all of a sudden, it hits him. He realizes the structure of this thing, it wasn't just for these big, complicated projects. No, it was way more fundamental. It actually described our basic, everyday tendency to engage with, well, anything. This shift was, it was so big it needed a totally new name. He realized he wasn't just talking about knowledge anymore. He was describing this kind of ecological pattern. Our default tendency whenever we come across any object. So he grabs his notebook, starts sketching, and this new concept starts to form. He ends up calling it posture. But here's where it gets really interesting. That sketch, it wasn't just on some blank page. No, he was actually using a kind of hidden structure, like a mental map that was already there, guiding his thoughts right toward the answer. And that map has a name, the world of life. Now, don't think of it like a regular map with cities and roads. It's more like a map of the fundamental boundaries of our whole creative experience. It literally defines the outer limits, the very things that give our world its shape. So here they are, those 4 boundaries. And these aren't just some random categories he pulled out of a hat. They represent 4 really essential forces that frame pretty much our entire creative lives: spirituality, science, individuals, and collectives. The best way to think about these is like 4 different directions on a compass, right? Spirituality, that's pointing toward ultimate meaning. Science is pointing to the material world, the physical stuff. Individuals, that's all about our personal drive. And collectives, that's our social roles, our communities, our movements. Okay, but the real innovation, the game changer, came next. He drew a second, smaller square right inside the main one. And this one simple move, it created this central space for what he called a project. And, maybe even more importantly, it opened up a whole new creative territory between that center and the outer edges. All right, so this is where it gets good. We're about to see how this map isn't just a box to put your old ideas in. It's actually an engine for generating brand new ones. I mean, that sounds almost impossible, doesn't it? You're just staring at an empty diagram. How on earth is that supposed to give you an answer that you didn't already have in your head? Well, the secret is that the diagram's boundaries act as what's called a spatial heuristic. And that's just a fancy way of saying they give you a mental shortcut. They're kind of like magnets for your ideas. Each boundary basically calls out and asks the question, hey, what kind of concept belongs right here? So the process becomes this kind of guided search. You just look at each boundary one by one, and you ask yourself, okay, what kind of idea just fits here? What feels right? You're not inventing things out of thin air. You're actually pulling concepts you already know from your own brain that perfectly match what that space is asking for. And here's what happened. This is the result of that process. Posture was the perfect answer from the science boundary. Persona, our sense of self, that came from the individual's boundary. Position, our role in society, that slotted right into collectives. And doctrine, our belief system, that came from spirituality. Just like that, a complete framework, all generated from an empty shape. It's amazing. Now, this is so important. This wasn't just a one-time magic trick. This single operation, this whole idea of thinking with shapes, it didn't just create one thing. It unlocked an entire cascade of new frameworks. Think about it. By keeping the exact same double square map, but just swapping out the project in the middle, he could run the whole process over and over again. And each time, it would generate a totally new set of connected ideas. Just look at this. It's incredible. On the left, you've got that personal orientation framework we were just talking about. But on the right, it's the exact same map, but this time it's used to chart the failure modes of knowledge. It's generating concepts like dogmatism from the science boundary and echo chambers from the collective's boundary. Same structure, totally different topic. Wild, right? And man, was this technique productive. In just a matter of weeks, it churned out 4 completely distinct frameworks. And every single one used the exact same spatial logic to map out a totally different dimension of our creative and cultural lives. Okay, so what's the big takeaway here for you? How can you actually use this? Well, what this all reveals is a fundamentally different way to even approach the whole idea of, well, generating ideas. Maybe the most important lesson is this. Sometimes the answer is already waiting for you right there in the structure of the problem itself. The final model, it wasn't all planned out in advance. It just emerged piece by piece as that spatial trick was used over and over. It's a true process of discovery, not just planning. And this completely shifts our relationship with diagrams. We're moving away from just using them to show what we already think. Instead, we're using them as active tools to help us discover what we think in the first place. They actually become partners in the whole creative process. So I want to leave you with a question. Think about the models or the mind maps, even the simple to-do lists you use every day. What if they're very structured? They're empty corners and the blank spaces. What if they already hold the answers you've been looking for? What new ideas are just sitting there waiting for you to ask the right spatial question?